The reason that we meditate and the reason that we practice yoga and do things to keep our body healthy is because that helps us to have a body, a vehicle, to process consciousness more clearly. The more refined our nervous system and the more awake and alert we are, yet remaining in a relaxed state, the easier it is for us to experience our innate nature as peace, as having a connection to the wholeness of life, a feeling that we are provided for in all ways, and knowing that we are not really separate or different from the people around us, the animals, the creatures, all life. And when we have that sense, we live in harmony with nature, with our highest self, and usually we make better decisions, we have better understanding, and the amount of pain in our life is diminished. And that pain that does come doesn't debilitate us, doesn't cripple us. It's just the change within our consciousness, just like the seasons change or the weather changes. It comes and it goes, yet we remain established in the sense of peace, the sense of knowing. And a lot of people would call this a state of enlightenment. And enlightenment is a good thing to aim for, although I found that oftentimes the word itself has many connotations for individuals that aren't realistic compared to the actual experience of it. So while it's good to aim for, it's also good to remember that our expectations of it probably are not accurate, and that what we do with our meditation and our yoga practice is to learn to find out what it really is like, and then live from that state. And when you think about your meditation and your yoga practice, realize that this is exercise, this is effort, which allows you to experience a calm, clear mental, emotional state, a strong body as best as you are able, that when you sit down to contemplate the infinite, to contemplate your very self, the wholeness of life, you're no longer distracted. So you can get the information, you can get the direct realization of the divine presence within and around you, or the realization that you are one, that you are infinite, that you exist forever, and that all in all everything's all right, even with all the changes in the world, with all the changes in the life, and all the changes in mind. Because when we meditate, thoughts can persist, and even when we're on a very good spiritual direction, changes occur, things come up, we have to react, we have to be appropriate to the situations. And that's just the way it is. We do this in a surrendered fashion without attachment, and as long as we can keep that detachment, doing what's right, living effectively, without getting too caught up in the results of our actions, but trying our best, we relieve ourselves of karma, we discharge our karma. And the less karma we have, the easier it is to experience peace, the easier it is to experience more refined states of consciousness, both in normal life when we're doing things, and also in our deep meditations. And when I talk about relaxed yet alert, when a lot of people meditate, they have a tendency to fall asleep or drift off into unconsciousness, or to daydream or get caught up in thought processes. And that's not really effective. And the thing that's not effective is getting caught up in these experiences or getting pulled into an unconscious state. Now, if we are alert yet relaxed, the mind can do whatever it wants, and yet we are not attached to it. We do not get pulled into it. We are not distracted by it. We can keep our focus on the technique, or we can keep our focus on the point of contemplation, whether it be yourself, contemplating God, contemplating the divine infinite presence all around you, whatever it may be. These things don't distract us. So having thoughts in meditation isn't necessarily terrible, and you'll find that the more you're able to patiently ignore these thoughts and distractions while focusing on your chosen ideal, they eventually do become less and less. and so thoughts will subside in time. And since this is a talk on being enlightened, I think it's a good idea to have a sense of what really leads to that state of enlightenment, beyond our meditation practice, our yoga practice, doing our best to live in harmony and at peace in the world. In Vasistha's Yoga, chapter 5, verse 13, there's a particular paragraph that I found to be pretty striking. So Vasistha is saying to Rama, when the limited and conditioned feeling, I am so-and-so, ceases, there arises consciousness of the all-pervading infinite. Abandon the false and fanciful notion of the ego sense within your own heart, and when this ego sense is dispelled, the supreme light of self-knowledge will surely shine in your heart. This ego sense alone is the densest form of darkness. When it is dispelled, the inner light shines by itself. He who knows I am not, nor does the other exist, nor is there non-existence, and whose mental activity has thus come to a standstill, is not engrossed in acquisitiveness. There is no bondage here other than craving for acquisition and the anxiety to avoid what one considers undesirable. Do not succumb to such anxiety, and do not let acquisition of what is considered desirable be your goal. Giving up both of these attitudes, rest in what remains. Even in the Yoga Sutras, they talk about aversions and compulsions, and how these are the two states that we need to overcome to experience oneness. Now Vasistha here says that the ego sense, the sense of I am so-and-so, the sense of otherness, is key in keeping us bound and keeping us from realizing our true nature. And one thing that you can do that really helps to overcome this is when you meditate, since you will be practicing intently, when you meditate, sit down, and after you've acknowledged the divine as it's real to you, and after you've acknowledged the teachers that have helped you along the way and inspired you, and after you've acknowledged your one infinite self, that is the self of all, I found it really helpful to imagine that I am dissolving, that the sense of me is just disappearing. The connections to family, to friends, to career, to ideas, to thoughts, to hobbies, to preferences, to things that I'm afraid of, whatever it may be, if we can let that dissolve, then almost immediately a very peaceful state arises. Another thing that you can do is when you sit to meditate is just imagine that you are fulfilled in all ways. Whatever thoughts that make you think you need something, you just bring up this state that it's already been fulfilled. You are fulfilled in all ways. No matter what it is, you are fulfilled in all ways. And if you can really get into that state and stay there, you'll find very quickly that thoughts subside. You're able to meditate much more clearly and alertly. And you'll be much happier during the process. You'll enjoy it more. And then when you're done, the effects of the meditation will sustain itself over the rest of the day. Once you have that sense of fulfillment, you'll be able to work better. You'll be able to interact with individuals better. You'll be less inclined to be thinking about yourself and what you can get out of situations. And then your work will be more effective, it'll be more enjoyable, and people will also enjoy your presence more. So this is not to create another personality ideal where you're just happy all the time, because sometimes that's just not the case. But it's really to have this underlying sense of fulfillment, and this underlying sense that there's not really a personality here. That's fictitious. That's made up. You made that up. People told you things about yourself which strengthened this sense of personality. So you can still interact with the world through the personality, but it's not you. And you can also pull back and have this sense that it is the divine infinite consciousness, the wholeness of life, which is interacting through this personality in the world. And the more you do that, you'll be surprised at the opportunities that arise in your life, the sense of accomplishment that you have, and peace and fulfillment overall in all things that come up. So remember, Abandon the sense that you are so-and-so. You can acknowledge that you have an ego to work through, but do not identify with it. Let it go. Let it be what it is, while you remain established in this sense of wholeness, this sense that everything is you, that your interactions in this world are the one infinite consciousness interacting with itself. Letting go of the anxiety for acquisition and avoiding what you consider to be undesirable. Let go of that. And once you let it go, pay attention to what remains. It's very subtle. Might seem like a very confusing, odd statement to make. But just remember, once you've let go of the sense of anxiety to keep things away from you, and you've let go of the anxiety, the craving to have more of something in your life, what is left over from that release, what is left over is the infinite consciousness, your very self, which is the self of all. Another passage, there's a couple here that I enjoy. In the same chapter, verse 15, Vasistha goes on to say, when the self-forgetfully identifies itself with the objects seen and experienced, and is thus impurified, there arises the poison of craving. This craving intensifies delusion. Gods like Shiva, etc., may be able to cope with the fires of cosmic dissolution, but it is impossible for anyone to deal with the consuming fire of craving. Remember this is great. Whatever terrible sufferings and calamities there are in the world are all the fruits of craving. Think about that when you think about the state of the world and you think about the state of your life. Whatever terrible sufferings and calamities there are in the world are all the fruits of craving. And he goes on, remaining unseen and subtle, this craving is yet able to consume the very flesh, bone, and blood of the body. In a moment it seems to subside. The next moment it is in an expanded state. Afflicted by it, man becomes pitiable, weak, lusterless, mean, deluded, miserable, and fallen. We see here that craving definitely has a bit of a negative impact on your life. And what we need to know is, how do we deal with this craving? And as we've already said, meditation, yoga practice, having a healthy body, an organized mind, refined nervous system, that gives you a little bit better opportunity to overcome craving, which is why we practice it. Vasistha goes on to say, give up craving by giving up thinking or conceptualization. The mind cannot exist without thinking or conceptualization. First, let the images of I, you, and this not arise in the mind. For it is because of these images that hopes and expectations come into being. If you can thus refrain from building these images, you will also be counted as a man or woman of wisdom. We see here again, he stresses the idea that I, you, and this is what causes all the problem, that concept. I remember reading in another text one time that the greatest sin in the world is the sin of I, me, and mine. Now, we don't want to get into sins, but just metaphorically think about that. And when you meditate, you will eventually experience a state where your personality no longer seems important, and so this sense of I disappears. And that can be scary, even a scary thought to some people. But the more we're able to feel comfortable in that state that is beyond the I, beyond the thought that there is a particular individual in this world that's here to suffer and enjoy life, and that there are other people out there which either support us or don't support us, when we move beyond that, eventually we realize it's all one thing, all ourself. And so we support ourselves, we also injure ourselves. And that's all because of the mind. So if we were able to let go of this sense of I and be open to the flows of grace, it's one way to look at it, the flows of grace, and let life happen while acting appropriately through the inspirations that arise, we'd find that life itself becomes a state of enlightenment, a state of peace. And I was reading a passage from Joel Goldsmith, I believe the book was Living by Grace. He was saying that you know that you're making progress spiritually speaking not when you're having emotional highs or feeling wonderful and beautiful all the time, but when life seems to naturally and spontaneously take care of itself for you, as though there is a presence which goes before you and makes the paths ahead straight. And if there are difficulties, they are not terrible, all-consuming difficulties. They eventually resolve themselves. And that's a good point to remember. The more we have this sense of oneness consciousness, meaning that we are all and everything is us, the more we realize that the experiences here in this world are just the result of our thinking and our conceptualization. And ideally we want to move beyond conceptualization, first of all, so that we know what we are. But then we realize that the mind in conceptualization isn't there to dominate us, as it usually does, and to veil our natural innate intelligence. The mind in our conceptualization is there as a tool, because as we are one with this divine infinite consciousness, we are infinitely creative, and that creativity comes out of conceptualization. And most of us conceptualize and think unconsciously. Things just happen. It's like chaotic and confusing, and so our lives are chaotic and confusing. But once we know what we are, then we're able to consciously create and direct the life before us as best we can, should we choose to. Or we can simply surrender, let life happen, let ourselves dissolve, and experience that infinite consciousness fully and completely, which a lot of people would consider to be complete and total liberation. So it's up to you. But again, the idea is that we are endeavoring to remember what we are, the truth of our being, to move beyond the delusion that keeps us thinking that we are contracted, small people trapped in a body and trapped in a life circumstance. We endeavor to imagine what it would be like to move beyond the sense of I, me, and mine, to dissolve conceptualization and thinking and see what is there beyond conceptualization and thinking. And one way you can relate to this is imagine a time when you were outside in nature. And I know I've mentioned this before, but imagine if you were outside in nature and the sun was shining and the breeze was blowing, the grass was waving. You could hear birds singing in the distance, maybe a plane overhead. You see the blue clouds in the sky. All of that takes absolutely no conceptualization. It's just pure experience. It exists without your thought. Everything, for the most part, exists without your thought. And when we sit to meditate, we're trying to experience existence without thought. We have a fear that if we stop thinking, that everything will fall apart. If we stop worrying, life will all of a sudden give us reasons to worry. But it's not true. And the safer we feel within ourselves, and I mean our greater selves with a capital S, the all of us, the more peaceful life is, and the more we see that everything's happening, and we don't have to worry about it. We don't have to do anything. We may have to respond appropriately to situations and circumstances, but life itself continues freely and easily. And if we get our mind out of the way, it has a tendency to flow a little bit better. We use our mind for constructive planning and creative thinking, but other than that, we just put it in neutral. And I remember one fellow that used to come to a meditation class that I taught. He came over one time. He was working on my computer. He has a computer business. And he asked me about the economy and how business was doing, and I told him things were fine, and I asked him how he was doing. And he said, well, there for a while he was worried. He said, but then he realized that it was the mind that was really killing him. That was the thing that was making things all screwed up for him business-wise. And once he remembered that and let it go, things just naturally panned out. Give that a try. See how it works for you. And remember, as you practice, if there's a sense of fear, a sense of insecurity, because you're not used to existing free of the mind, or free of worry, or free of your sense of self, small sense of self. Just try it a little bit at a time. Relax, see how it goes, and continue. And eventually you'll find that it's very easy. As the months and weeks and years go by, it becomes your natural state. And then you enjoy life more, people enjoy being around you, you're more successful, and your meditations are much deeper and more revealing. And life itself becomes a spiritual practice. There's one last portion here that I'd like to read. Vasistha says, when objectivity arises in your consciousness. So what is objectivity? Objectivity is that you are here and there are other things out there different than you. So when objectivity arises in your consciousness, the latter becomes the conditioned and limited, and that is bondage. When objectivity is abandoned, you become mindless. That is liberation. Coming into contact with the qualities of nature is conducive to bondage. Abandoning them is the road to liberation. Knowing this, do whatever you please. Realizing I am not, and this is not, remain firm and unmoved, like the infinite space. Abandon the impure thought which creates a duality of self and world. In the middle between the self as the seer, and the world as the seen, you are the seen. Always remain in this realization. Between the experiencer and the experience, you are the experiencing. Knowing this, remain in self-knowledge. That may seem a little out there, but again, these teachings aren't meant to be understood immediately. If you did understand it immediately, well then you probably didn't need to be reading this book. But they're meant to inspire a contemplation, so you get a direct experience of what on earth is this teacher talking about. And so the key here, really, is the idea of abandoning the impure thought which creates a duality of self and world. And self, that's the thing you think you are, and the world, that's everything else. That is a duality. So in the middle between the self as the seer and the world as the seen, you are the seeing. Always remain in this realization. Between the experiencer, again, you are the experiencer, and the experience, the things that are out there, supposedly, you are the experiencing. Knowing this, remain in self-knowledge. Contemplate that as often as you like, and I'd recommend contemplating it a lot. And one way you can help to make this a little more understandable is to think about dreams. When you are dreaming, there is the point that you think you are in the dream, the perspective which you identify with. And then there are all these things, people, animals, experiences, objects, places within the dream. And they change quickly, and they can be very different within a few minutes. But within that dream, what else is there but you? The perspective that you identify with, that's you, of course. But all these other things, they're you as well. They're not something else interjected into your consciousness. They are a seemingly objectified aspect of you. And then go beyond that and think about even the dream, the thing in which all of this is occurring, the other and the you. That's you too. The whole thing is you. And that presence, that witness, that thing in which this occurs is you. That is there when you're awake, when you're working, when you're interacting with your spouse or your friends, when you're driving somewhere. It was there when you were younger. It was there before you were born. It'll be there when you're gone. It's there when you're conscious and when you're unconscious. So it's always there. It's just that we're not always aware of it. And so you can see this idea of remaining in self-knowledge as that in which the experiencer and the experience occurs. That is you, the self. That expands our consciousness. And the more we expand our consciousness, the more this makes sense, the less words are able to describe it, but it is an inner knowing that arises in you. And I'd encourage you to contemplate this idea as often as possible, because the more you contemplate it, the more you draw to you the actual experience. And again, Joel Goldsmith, in his book, says that, the book Living by Grace, he talks about what you really want to be doing is realizing that divine presence within all aspects of your life. So you invite it in, you ask it to be realized, you ask to know it more fully. And when you meditate, I would advise that too. Think about how you conceive the divine to be and invite it into your experience. It's already there, so you don't have to worry about calling it to you. It's already there. God, the divine infinite consciousness, it's always there. It's you, it's everything. It can't not be there. But you cannot be aware of it. You can be deluded or you can be blind to it. And the whole process that we are aiming for is to bring it so much into your awareness that you know it, you feel it, you experience it in and as all things. This expands your consciousness. One other aspect or one other thing that you can do in your meditation is towards the end, just sit there quietly, letting go of your attention on your mantra or your technique, and be aware, just aware of every sensation that's coming to you through the ears, through the eyes, through the skin, all the thoughts within the mind. Just watch it and have the sense that all of this is you. It's all of you changing. The birds outside, they're you. That silly thought going through your mind, that's you. You're not attached to it, you're just admitting it's you. You expand beyond that. Imagine the galaxies, imagine the stars, imagine the earth, the world, even beyond that into pure infinite consciousness. All this is you. The more you contemplate that and the more you imagine it, the realization, the actual realization occurs to you that it's true. And you have a direct experience of it beyond the imagination. And again, this helps you understand the truth of enlightenment, of liberation, of what it means to be one, whole, undivided, infinite consciousness. Some people have miraculous awakening experiences. Some people it takes years. But the thing is that by doing this work, even if it's only a half hour, once or twice a day, continue to contemplate it throughout the day. By doing this work, you eventually have the direct realization, and that's permanent. So no matter where you are in the universe in consciousness, whether you are embodied or not, you have the wisdom, the understanding of what you are. And then with that comes the peace and the knowing that everything's just fine. And then life itself reflects that experience. And that's what this is all about. Self-knowing, self-realization, self-revelation, and then eternity. And a peaceful eternity, a creative eternity, an abundant eternity. Keep all of this in mind as you practice your meditation and yoga, and keep it in mind as you go throughout your day, and make it an important part of your life, and you'll find that your life gets better, and that your mind gets calmer, and you understand more.